This weekend, 2 people were killed and several others wounded when armed men opened fire on patrons in Ga-Rankuwa on Friday night. It's just one of many tavern shootings that are dominating headlines in the country at the moment. Let's speak about this concerning trend and speak to forensic psychologist Gérard Labuschagne. Gérard, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the program. So we're reporting again on another shooting, this time 2 people killed. How are you making sense of what's going on? Is it that we're seeing more of these shootings, or just that they're being reported on more often now, especially on the back of the largest shooting in Soweto?
Hi, Tanegile, and thanks to all the viewers. Yeah, I mean, look, we definitely don't really have a history in South Africa of mass shootings. So I think it's safe to say there have been a lot. It's not just a case of the media hearing about one and then sort of focusing on other ones that would have happened and maybe not got the media attention. So it is quite unusual. I mean, we've had, for example, Tempe military base, I think it was 1999, where a member of the SADF based in that Tempe military base took one of his SANDF firearms and shot and killed, I think, 6 people. And that was really a workplace violence incident. We had something almost like that at the Rosebank police station a couple of years ago, where an admin clerk who had been fired managed to get his hold of a SAP's firearm and kill the captain, who was the HR manager, who oversaw his disciplinary process, and then shot the station commissioner also. So there have been these types, but those are more your psychologically motivated ones, where I'm starting to think that these ones are really more, for lack of a better word, organized crime motivated, faction fighting motivated.
But how do we even begin to crack such a case when in the Ga-Rankuwa case people say, well, a vehicle drove by, it was basically a drive-by shooting, and then shots rang out, and the next thing you had 2 people who'd been killed, about 7 or so wounded, yet there doesn't appear to have been a message, at least not verbally or in writing, left.
Yeah, so these wouldn't have, your psychologically motivated ones tend to have what we call leakage, these pre-warning behaviors that are identifiable prior to, for example, that Uvalde school shooting in the United States we saw recently and other those types of shootings. If it's more of your organized crime basis, they aren't behaving the same way as those psychologically motivated shooters are. But if you have a group of people who are deciding, planning, plotting, they have to get 1 and 2 people to assist them, they have to get the firearms, that is stuff that things like crime intelligence should be picking up. Otherwise, what is the point of crime intelligence if they're only going to help you after a crime has been committed? So whenever you have people conspiring, there's a greater chance that someone would have heard something, someone might have been approached to participate and backed out, or was asked for firearms, or there's knowledge of this faction is angry with that faction, is going to plan something. And that is something that crime intelligence should be, if a functioning crime intelligence should be picking up on.
We appear, though, in our conversation to be lumping all of these shootings together. I mean, in some of the cases, yes, not all, it appears that robbery was the main intent, where items were taken, etc. But in a case such as Ga-Rankuwa, where it was just a drive-by shooting, and we've not been told of anything being demanded or taken, in Soweto, 16 people also shot, nothing was taken from the scene. Should we not separate, then, these shootings and treat them individually?
Yeah, of course. Look, I mean, I can tell you now that us in the public don't have nearly the complete story. Probably the people closest besides the suspect themselves would be the police if they're doing obviously a competent investigation, which I'm sure they're putting all the resources into it. So one cannot assume that these are in any way linked to each other. Like you say, we cannot assume, for example, the Lenasia shooting seemed quite different, people sitting on the side of the road. So again, also being cautious about assuming that these all have the same kind of motive. But once we have sort of groups of people who are involved, we tend to not have that individualistic psychological motive and more of your sort of criminal intent motive. But like you say, we have to look at the facts of each case through investigation. And then decide, what could be the possible motive, which of course could point towards potential suspects.
How much should we worry about potential copycat attacks or other people being inspired to do the same then in their communities or elsewhere?
Look, it is always a possibility. We definitely see with your American-style mass shootings that very often within a few days after one mass shooting, it almost does trigger off someone who had it sitting in the back of their mind that they want to do that. I mean, that's not going to make you do it, but if you already had those inclinations, already had those grievances, etc., then, those do seem to trigger it off. Here, again, it is very unusual to have so many of these taking place in such a short period of time, so one would be you couldn't say there's no possibility that guys who have been thinking about something similar are doing this, or see this as a way of dealing with their kind of issue and problem. it is possible, but you probably would have already had to have had some anger, aggression towards your potential victims, prior to this taking place.
And given the low level, and I use that word rather loosely, that phrasing, low level of arrests, I mean, there have been some made in connection with the Peter Maritzburg shooting at Katlehong as well. But, for example, the largest one in Soweto, there's been no progress as far as arrests and prosecutions. Is it because the more extreme the crime, we're likely or should believe that the more experienced the criminals? I mean, in Soweto, we're told, for example, that the attackers used high-caliber weapons.
Look, I mean, if you look at the Sizzlers massacre that took place early 2000s in Cape Town at the massage parlor, those were two very inexperienced guys who actually just, in a way you could say, messed up a robbery and ended up shooting a bunch of people. One of them is actually coming up for parole as we speak. So I don't think automatically the amount of deaths indicates experience or even necessarily the type of weapon used. I mean, there will be pre-planning and forethought, I could almost say without a doubt in each of these particular instances. But again, I think the fact that nobody's been arrested, again, we must be careful to equate that the police aren't doing anything. You might be following up a number of leads, tracing suspects, and wanting to arrest a number of them at the same time to avoid scaring the other ones off that might go underground. So it's not to say that there isn't perhaps a massive amount, and I would like to think that the police have thrown all their experienced detectives and resources into this. But we haven't had arrests. Yes, we all want arrests as soon as possible, but it doesn't per se mean that the cops aren't doing all that they should be doing at this point in time. And remember, arrest is one thing. We have to make sure we have evidence to get a conviction in court. So I can walk out and arrest anybody right now and charge them for any crime, but it doesn't mean we're going to necessarily charge them. So I think we must be careful about pressuring the cops to arrest purely for the sake of satisfying the community and making sure that they are arresting when it's the right time to do so. So
the sort of publicity arrests we've seen in the past that ultimately then fail to hold up once in court. I want to ask you about the psychological impact on the country more broadly when we're dealing with news reports every weekend of people being shot, especially at public places such as a tavern or a nightclub. What does that then do to a nation, a people?
Yeah. Look, I think in many senses, although these cases we don't believe are linked, it's almost like a serial murderer that, where's this person going, where are these people or different people going to strike, it's at what time, and it almost feels at places that really don't deserve to be targeted. So I think it does have a general level of anxiety amongst the community. But again, obviously having said that, South Africa is a massive place. So even these number of incidences we have, the chances of you becoming a victim of such a shooting is still incredibly rare. But I think the society does expect the police to solve this, and I think it's fair to expect that. Whenever you have a bunch of people who are involved in a criminal act, it's more opportunities for information to come out, somebody hearing something who knows the suspects, and there should be arrests. How soon? Well, obviously we'd like it as soon as possible, but we have to make sure the police do that responsibly and don't have for-show arrests where we have cases withdrawn, and of course then the community also gets outraged and lacks faith in the police for their capabilities.
Gérard Labuschagne, thank you very much for speaking to us on Newzroom Afrika today.